Dr Piet Croucamp is a political analyst at Northwest University. Dr Croucamp, good afternoon to you. So this group of Afrikaans organizations, they claim to speak for around 2 million people. They say they want, I think the English phrase they used was a cultural accord with government. How should we read that? What are they really asking for?
I think you must be careful to say it's Afrikaans people. They identify themselves as Afrikaners. The accord that they want to sign with the government is on behalf of Afrikaners, which means it does not necessarily include all Afrikaans-speaking people, and it even makes a distinction between those who identify strongly as Afrikaners and those who don't necessarily identify strongly as Afrikaners. If you look at the declaration, you will see that it looks very much like a document that the Freedom Front, for instance, would make peace with. It is something that seems to be ideologically removed from what the DA, for instance, would configure as a political group. So I think one must just be careful. It's a very specific identity. It's not Afrikaans-speaking people necessarily, and it's Afrikaners, and Afrikaners identify with a specific ideology. When they say they have the support of 2 million people, I think they count the chickens, the children, the cattle, everything in. Because if you look at the support base that Freedom Front has, I think it's something in the last election, something like 3-point-something%. So surely they can't be speaking about whites, they can't be speaking about all Afrikaans-speaking people, and they might not even be speaking about all Afrikaners.
There's so much to all of this, because you heard Dr. Theuns Eloff, and people with long memories will remember the role he played in the 80s in leading a group of Afrikaans intellectuals. It was the same person, wasn't it, to go and meet the ANC during that time. But it's interesting because are they kind of asking for more than other groups get? So I don't know if people who identify culturally as Xitsonga people have a cultural accord with the government. And I know Dr. Eloff claims that those people are represented through the Council of Traditional Leaders, but I don't know if, are they open to the criticism that this group, this Afrikaner group, is looking for more than other people get?
Look, I don't think there's much doubt. I see the President has rejected the notion or the idea of Afrikaners getting a specific dispensation. And as far as I know, this group has frequently visited Luthuli House, and they've spoken to some members of the ANC. But I've never seen the President pitching for those meetings, or even for Kili and Balula. So I think what they're trying to do is to carve out a specific dispensation where they are consulted, especially as far as language and schools and cultural traditions are concerned, and perhaps even territory. I think that they also make an issue about where people live in specific areas where they dominate, specific Afrikaner type of communities, those that are established Afrikaner communities. They would want that to be preserved in some other way. Look, it's going to be hard to fend off the criticism that they seek a special dispensation, they seek special status, and it's going to be. But I don't. It's not as if I don't have sympathy with what they're trying to do. I just don't think it's workable. And what I've said to some of them that I've spoken to, I said, why don't you make yourself indispensable as a social partner? Why do you need some form of protection within the court? If you deliver the services, if you contribute to society, if you play an active role in distributing the greater good in South African society, you'll be recognized for that. You don't need a special dispensation to do that. I think that's their weakness. Why do they seek to have almost a protective type of dispensation? I think it's going to be a hard sell. Quite frankly, I don't think the ANC is going to bite. I've been a part of a group that organized discussion with the ANC in the past. They make you all sorts of promises about an Afrikaner desk they will create in Luthuli House. Those things never come off. I don't think this is ever going to come off. And I think the big drawback for it is the fact that it is on the conservative side, it aligns with the Freedom Front, it aligns with the special dispensation for Afrikaners. I just don't think the ANC can afford to buy into that, and I don't think South Africa can afford to buy into that.
In a way, doesn't it go against what's been the big social dynamic of the last 30 years, which is people who come from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds living together? Obviously, sometimes not very easily, often very easily indeed. If you go in many households across this country now, you'll find people with, to keep saying with a Xitsonga, with one Xitsonga parent and one Zulu parent. You will find, you'll find many... I'm sorry?
Even you got it wrong. White South Africans and black South Africans live as separate as they lived during apartheid to a large degree. I think to a certain degree Afrikaners and white people had this protection network of their socioeconomic status which allow them. Neighborhoods are still largely white. Melville, Sandton, those are white neighborhoods, and that does create the impression that it's possible to maintain that type of dispensation. South Africans do not live together. South Africans do not share the economy. They don't share space in South Africa. Black people live on the fringes of white society and white cities. And I think that to a certain degree creates this impression that you can maintain that, because one of the things that they make an issue about is security. In other words, safety and security. So they feel that they as a group have specific security and safety concerns that other people may or may not have. But that security concern that they have, and the fact that they want certain areas to be reserved, almost not reserved for whites, but to be considered white-dominated or Afrikaner-dominated areas, it is reminiscent. It reminds a little bit of a continuation of the apartheid system. I think that's why it's such a hard sell, especially to black people. I do not think they're going to buy it, and I don't think they should.
I mean, in a way, hanging over all of this is the example of Orania, isn't it? I mean, it just makes it look like this group wants other Oranias.
Yeah, but not the same. I think if you draw that comparison, you won't understand them. I think, for instance, in some areas in South Africa, for instance, in Hermanus, it's mostly white people living in a very specific area and the black people living in the outskirts of that area. I think they don't want that protective enclave to be threatened by forced integration, forced legislation that force people to integrate. I think that's what the type of protection that they seek. This, call it privilege, because I don't want to do that, because that creates the wrong impression. But this privileged area of the safety of being a dominant cultural disposition in a particular geographical area, I think they try to some other way convince government, convince the ANC to go into an agreement with them, which will allow that to prevail. And it sounds naive, but I don't think it's workable, yeah.
The other big issue, again, in the news today is, of course, the situation around Umkhonto we Sizwe. We've been looking at the court ruling that went against the ANC in favor of Umkhonto we Sizwe to allow it to use that name. You've been looking at that as well. You've been writing about it. It seems, in a way, that MK's rise is kind of unstoppable. Everyone's looking to them. They seem to be making most of the news of this election. Is that all because of former President Zuma?
We still have to remember the DA typically, they manage to get around about 80% of their support base to the voting booth. The EFF, for instance, is less successful. You will see that in polls, normally they get around about 15 and 16%, and then eventually 11 and 12, or 10 or 11% in the election. I wouldn't be surprised if MK has exactly the same problem. You still have to get your support base to actually get up on that day and walk the distance, cover the miles, expend the money to go and vote. So the 22% or thereabout that the polls pick up for them in KwaZulu-Natal, we still have to see that when it actually manifests in real voting behavior. But what a fantastic experience it is to at last see a political party, regardless of how you view them, at last a political party that has the capacity to take away votes from the ANC. I think that it makes the system, the election, much more competitive, much more democratic, and just, you know, if I was a sports fan, I would have rooted for them, because I do think that it's been long overdue that we need a competitive election, and in KwaZulu-Natal, it's going to be really, really competitive. And I see Julius Malema and MK, they think about forging some form of an alliance there. That will make it very, very interesting, because it seems like the idea, and many people had that fear that the EFF and the ANC will go into a type of alliance, and that will force politics to the left, economic policy to the left. I think the DA made much about that. Well, now it's a very different permutation, and an interesting one too.
It's interesting you say it will move politics to the left. I mean, if you look at Umkhonto we Sizwe's manifesto, which was published on Friday, they talk about doing away with the Constitution, talking about having Parliament reigning supreme, having a second House of Parliament made up of traditional leaders, and kings and queens in South Africa. I mean, in a way, I mean, there are plenty of parties that say they want to change the Constitution. I can't think of many that want to abolish the Constitution altogether. I mean, they're calling for radical change.
Yeah, one must be careful in South Africa if we talk about left and right and conservative and liberal, because it's appropriated type of constructs. So if I say to the left, what I'm saying is that the nationalization of land and nationalization of banks seem to be part of that. And that's usually associated with the left type of agenda. Look, parties can have the policies that they want, and they can make the promises that they want. They still have to win the election. They still have to come in a position where they actually gain power. So I don't think, as South Africans, we have to fear that they, as a part, MK will win an election. They seem to be concentrated in KwaZulu-Natal, in Mpumalanga, we don't know, but we suspect there might be significant support. That spill over into Gauteng. But we're not talking about majorities here. We're talking about maybe national percentage of support of, say, around about between 8, 9, 10% at the most. So to think that somebody's got the constitution will be abolished and that we will have regime changes in South Africa, I think that it's always a theoretical chance, but it's a 1 and 2% chance. I don't think it's something that we have to go into election and have this dreaded fear that everything will be changing and the MK will take over together with the EFF. That type of fear-mongering, it's not in real politics.
You talk about MK and the EFF voting together. Doesn't the EFF have quite a lot to fear from MK? I mean, the EFF wanted to make KZN their focal point in this election. They had the election manifesto launch in KwaZulu-Natal, one of 3 political parties to use Moses Mabhida Stadium for it. And I've heard nothing from their campaign on the ground in KZN since then.
Yeah, and we've seen from the polls, there's a clear indication that MK takes some support from the EFF, some from the IFP, and a lot from the ANC. If that manifests in reality eventually, that's one of the reasons why the EFF, apart from I think there's some ideological overlay, some policy overlay there, I do think that's one of the reasons why the EFF and MK should have considered cooperating after the election. Because the one is feeding into the other one's support base. And the DA battles with the same thing, smaller parties in this chartered arrangement that they actually just take his other support base. Well, MK and the EFF must be careful that they don't just feed off each other as opposed to building a stronger support base at the expense of the ANC.
Dr. Piet Croucamp, thank you, political analyst at Northwest University. I really enjoyed the conversation. Lots more to come, of course. I suspect on both of those issues, actually.